Over the years, proponents of abortion have put forth a number of arguments to support a woman's right to choose abortion. Today, we're going to examine the arguments for the pro-choice or pro-abortion position. To learn more, join me for today's episode of All Things Apostolic. It's interesting that people in favor of abortion argue that the Supreme Court's landmark decision in Roe v. Wade in 1973 supposedly provided nationwide protections for both women and unborn fetuses. They believe that under Roe, state regulations had to respect a trimester framework that balanced competing interests at each pregnancy stage. The trimester system goes something like this. During the first trimester, wherein the fetus is fully dependent on its mother, the woman's right to end her pregnancy would take precedence. States could not stop or unduly burden her right to an abortion. In the second trimester, states needed to balance the woman's and fetus's interests. They could regulate abortions, but they could not outlaw them altogether at this stage. It is during the third trimester that a fetus achieves viability, meaning it can survive without its mother. The fetus's right to life took precedence here over the mother's right to end the pregnancy, except in instances when her life or health were endangered. The Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs v. Jackson in 2022 overturned Roe, completely upending that system. With that decision, power moved from the federal government back to the states. States can now decide whether to allow or ban abortions, and under what circumstances. So presently, abortion laws vary by state. Today, we're going to look at 6 arguments commonly used by pro-abortionists. Most of the arguments for abortion rights commit a logical fallacy known as begging the question. In order for the various pro-abortion arguments to work, advocates assume that the fetus is not a full person or human. But pro-life advocates rightly point out the question-begging fallacy so as to focus the debate on the central issue, the personhood of the unborn. The fundamental argument of the pro-life position is that the fetus is a person. So you're going to hear this response come up for each pro-abortion argument because it is the fundamental issue. First, probably the pro-abortion argument that we've all heard the most is that a woman has the right to do with her own body whatever she chooses. The fundamental principle of the pro-abortion movement is the woman's right to choose. There are even some people who personally don't approve of abortion and would never have one themselves, but they still support a woman's right to choose abortion on the basis that it's her body and therefore her choice. There are several ways that we can respond to this argument. First, a person's right over his or her own body is not absolute. In most states, prostitution is illegal, and a person cannot choose to use illegal drugs unless they want to get in trouble with the law. So we don't have absolute control over our own bodies. Second, the fetus is not technically part of a woman's body. It is genetically distinct with its own genetic code. Early in the pregnancy, the fetus has its own heart and circulatory system. From conception, it has a gender identity, and if it's a boy, that is a different gender than his mother. If the fetus is a part of the woman's body, how could we explain that a woman has a part of her body that is a different gender than her? This argument confuses the fetus being attached to the woman carrying it and being a part of the woman carrying it. It does not follow that just because the fetus is attached to its mother by an umbilical cord, that the fetus is a part of her in a way that denies its own separate identity. To put it differently, this argument confuses the fetus living inside the woman with being a part of her. Biologically, these are not the same, and being a part of her does not follow necessarily from the fact that the fetus lives inside of her. And this argument further begs the question of the nature of the fetus by assuming that it is less than fully human. Historically, in Western society, when life and freedom of choice have been in conflict, life has always taken precedence. Only if the fetus is not a person does a woman have a right to make a choice that would result in death. But if the fetus is a person, then very few freedoms would take precedence over the fetus's right to life. So only if one assumes that the fetus is not a person will the argument work. And that is really at the heart of the debate. Now, in a sense, I'm begging the question by assuming that the fetus is indeed a person. And we're going to get to that part in the next episode. Another argument in favor of abortion is that if it is illegal, then women will be stuck going to back alley abortion providers. The argument is that many desperate women will seek an abortion, even if it's illegal. And then they'll go to less than ideal or even risky settings with unlicensed physicians, thereby putting their health at significantly greater risk. There are several ways to respond to this argument. First and foremost, this argument begs the question, since one must assume that the fetus is not a person. Otherwise, the person advancing the argument would be arguing that society has the responsibility to make it safe to kill people who have the right to life. If the fetus is a person and abortion amounts to killing a person, then the issue of making it safer for a person to do so is irrelevant. Another counterargument is that the potential danger to women receiving back alley abortions is overstated. It is misleading to insist that the majority of illegal abortions are performed by unqualified physicians. Prior to 1973, when abortion was illegal, roughly 90% of abortions were performed by licensed physicians in good standing with their state medical boards. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or the CDC, since 1973, when abortion was legalized, there have been 506 reported maternal deaths from abortions, with 437 of those deaths caused by legal abortion. This does not account for the states that do not report to the CDC, including California, which accounts for about 15% of the nation's abortions. Pro-abortion advocates also claim that any substantial prohibition of abortion is unenforceable and would likely involve intolerable invasions of privacy. But prior to 1973, restrictive abortion laws were enforceable and were effective in limiting abortions. Now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned and abortion is again illegal in some states, it will be interesting to see how it is enforced. Another pro-abortion argument is that forcing women to continue their pregnancies will create overwhelming financial hardship, especially for poor women. Without safe and legal abortion, these women will be condemned to a life of poverty and financial burden, which is unfair to the women and to the children that they bring into the world. In response, this argument begs the question by assuming that the unborn poor are not persons. Otherwise, this argument could be used as a basis for exterminating all those who are financially burdensome to society. So see how this argument is a slippery slope? The unborn poor have to be considered not persons, or else this argument could justify the killing of those who are poor and financially burdensome to society. But we live in a society that recognizes that even people who are financially a burden on society still have a right to life. We don't kill poor people to fix the economic problem, and the solution to unwanted pregnancies is not to eliminate them. I'm not saying that there wouldn't be hardship by adding another person to care for, but the hardship cannot justify intentionally killing someone. Another pro-abortion argument is that society should not force women to bring unwanted children into the world. This is similar to the economic hardship argument, but it's broader because it encompasses pregnancies that are unwanted for more reasons than just financial hardship. The argument is that abortion helps society prevent bringing unwanted children into the world and thus prevents child abuse and child neglect. In response, this argument again begs the question by assuming that the fetus is not a person. Because if a fetus is a person, then abortion would be considered the worst imaginable form of child abuse. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, between 1973, when abortion was legalized, and 1982, child abuse increased more than 500%. Research reveals that the vast majority of battered children were wanted by their parents. One study showed that 91% of abused children were wanted children. In addition, the intrinsic value of the child is not based on the degree to which he or she is wanted. If a child is not wanted, that's more of a reflection on the parents than the child. And if the fetus is a person, then whether or not it is wanted is irrelevant to its right to life. Perhaps the issue of the homeless offers a comparison. There are many people who don't want to have homeless people in their community, but they're not eliminated because nobody questions that they are people with the right to life. When a person has a right to life, they can't just be eliminated. So the argument about a baby being unwanted hinges on the pro-abortion person's ability to demonstrate that the fetus is not a person. Another pro-abortion argument is that society should not force women to bring severely disabled children into the world. Medical technology now allows us to detect many deformities in the developing fetus, and this detection process is becoming more routine in prenatal care. Pro-abortion advocates consider it unfair and insensitive to force a woman to carry a pregnancy that she knows or thinks will result in a severely disabled child. Of all of the abortion scenarios, this is certainly a difficult one. One thing to recognize with this argument is that it would only justify abortion in this difficult situation. It would not extend abortion as a fundamental right. But as a rule, difficult cases do not make the general rule. It should also be noted that abortions in the case of disability are a relatively small percentage of the overall number of abortions performed annually. Although comprehensive data on reasons for abortion is not recorded in the United States, it is estimated that the health of the fetus supplies grounds in maybe up to 3% of all abortions. What has proven crucial to the rise of selective abortion is the cultural acceptance of the idea that abortion is a cure for disability. the public legitimization of the view that the way to eliminate suffering is to eliminate the sufferer. The convergence of breakthroughs in genetic testing in the 50s and 60s, followed by the legalization of abortion in the 70s, allowed healthcare to turn, wouldn't it be better if the disability did not exist, into, wouldn't it be better if the person with the disability did not exist? Aborting an unborn child diagnosed with a disability at whatever stage of gestation conveys to those living with disabilities a highly derogatory and discriminatory message about the fundamental worth of their lives. In selective abortion, the trait is allowed to obliterate the whole. With both discrimination and prenatal diagnosis, nobody finds out about the rest of the person. The test sends the message that there's no need to find out about the rest. Others view the part of a person which is their disability as a substitute for the whole person, who is summarily rejected through abortion. This type of selective abortion implicitly views a person as their disability. And like the other arguments, this argument begs the question of the personhood of the fetus. If the fetus is a person and it's okay to kill them, then this argument could be used to justify killing all disabled people. There is no moral difference between aborting a disabled fetus and executing disabled children. Yet no one believes that parents have the right to kill their disabled children because they're persons. Unless the assumption that the fetus is not a person is true, the argument collapses. And it's interesting to think that abortion of the disabled is not promoted by disabled people. It is not disabled people or their parents who want abortions of babies who may be disabled. It is those who are not disabled. Let us allow the disabled to speak for themselves. Also, this argument must rest on whether the fetus is a person, not on the disabled status of the fetus. In addition, it is presumptuous to say that a disabled life is not worth living and should be aborted. Yes, there are cases of severe disability, which are extreme and rare, but extreme cases cannot be used to justify abortion in cases of more moderate disabilities. No evidence supports the notion that unhappiness necessarily accompanies disability. Another pro-abortion argument is that society should not force women who are pregnant from sexual assault, such as rape or incest, to continue their pregnancies. This is probably one of the most compelling arguments. Since the woman had sex forced upon her against her will, it is argued that she should not be forced to continue a potential pregnancy. This is not a case of carelessness or irresponsibility, but there was a lack of consent to sex that made her pregnant. In a sense, society would be punishing the victim of a violent crime by making her a victim again. In response, thankfully, the number of pregnancies that result from rape or incest is very small. It used to be roughly 1 in 100,000 cases. It's more difficult to determine now because often the statistics blend rape with sexual coercion, in which a person feels pressured into sex, but it's actually not a physical attack. So the statistics have increased significantly, but it's because the people conducting the studies have broadened the definition, and it's not just a comparison of numbers of sexual assault, such as rape and incest, but oftentimes those statistics include sexual coercion, which is verbal but not physical. But how the pregnancy was conceived is irrelevant to the central question of the personhood of the fetus. This is because the child should not be penalized for the sin of his or her father. You can't eliminate or kill a person to relieve the trauma someone else has experienced, so the fetus is assumed to lack personhood. So this argument is certainly a strong one because the woman who is pregnant has been victimized. But if the fetus is a person, the woman's trauma doesn't justify killing a person. Abortion does not take away the evil of the rape. It adds another evil to it. We should punish the guilty rapist, not the innocent baby. And even if abortion were justified in a few extreme cases, such as rape, this would in no way justify abortion on demand, such as Roe v. Wade permitted. From our examination of key pro-abortion arguments, you can see that ultimately they rest on the principle that the fetus is not a person. So we're going to examine the personhood of the fetus in the next episode. So be sure to tune in. And thank you for joining me for today's episode of All Things Apostolic. Until next time, take care and God bless.